She spent a year and a half living quietly in Ireland. No American television. No tabloids. No cameras. Just a woman walking down ordinary streets where strangers would stop her and ask if she was okay, not because they recognized her, but because of the look on her face. Then Rosie O'Donnell came back. She sat down at the Tony Awards, and everything she said started circulating immediately. A cosmetic procedure that cost more than any car she has ever owned. A 13-year-old who nearly talked her out of it. A diabetes medication that changed her body in ways nobody saw coming. And a one-woman show that is bringing her back to a New York stage. But here's what nobody expected. She told all of it herself, before anyone else could. The detail that caught the most attention was not the Broadway news. It was something far more personal, and she delivered it the way she always does, straight, no filter. She had gotten a cosmetic procedure done. And rather than wait for a tabloid to run the story, she wrote about it herself in an essay before the interview even aired. That choice was deliberate. She has always believed in saying something true and complicated over saying nothing and letting someone else define what happened. But what made this story genuinely interesting was not the procedure itself. It was what almost stopped her from doing it. When she told her youngest child she was considering the procedure, the response was immediate. The child, 13 years old, autistic, looked at her and said, "If you do this, I will not be able to respect you anymore." That kind of statement from a kid is not strategic. It is not filtered. It is exactly what they feel, delivered directly. And Rosie took it seriously enough to put the whole thing off for months. So what finally changed her mind? She eventually went ahead with it in January, while she was still living in Ireland. She had it done and came home 10 days later. And here is the part she laughed telling. Her child, the same one who had delivered the ultimatum, did not notice. The change was subtle enough that the person most opposed to the idea never registered that it had happened. But there was a specific reason she had wanted it done in the first place, and it goes deeper than anyone might expect. Rosie O'Donnell has diabetes. She said it in the interview without hesitation, which is consistent with how she has handled her medical history her whole career, publicly, directly, without apology. She has been on a medication called Mounjaro for 3 years. Over that time, she lost more than 50 pounds. That is a serious, significant physical transformation. And it came not from a weight loss plan, but from managing a real medical condition. But here's what nobody talks about when they discuss these medications. Losing that much weight has consequences nobody prepares you for. The weight loss changed her face. It left excess skin. It created 2 lines near her mouth that made her look, in her own words, consistently sad or upset. Strangers in Ireland would approach her on the street and ask what was wrong, whether she was okay, what had happened. Her answer every time, nothing. That is just how my face looks now. Eventually, she decided that if her face was communicating an emotion she wasn't feeling, and if there was something she could do about it, she was going to do it. So she did. And then she wrote about it before anyone else could turn it into a headline. That pattern, getting ahead of the story by telling it herself, is not new for her. But the story behind the story goes back much further than a year and a half in Ireland. She started as a stand-up comedian in the 1980s, working clubs with a style that was fast and self-deprecating, rooted in a very specific kind of grief. Her mother died of breast cancer when Rosie was 10 years old. That loss has driven her in ways she has spoken about throughout her entire career. Her mother never got to see what she became, and that absence created an urgency in her, to say things, to do things, to show up fully and without pretense. Then came the film roles. Then came the talk show. And then came something that changed daytime television. The Rosie O'Donnell Show ran from 1996 to 2002, and it was unlike anything daytime had seen before. She was loud and genuine and deeply committed to Broadway at a time when mainstream media barely covered it. She introduced an entire generation of viewers to live theatre who had never set foot in a theatre in their lives. She was also publicly political in ways daytime television had not really accommodated before. And in 2002, she came out, not as a separate announcement, but in the middle of advocating for adoption rights for gay parents. Even then, she connected her identity directly to something she was fighting for. But here's where the story gets harder. The years that followed were not kind. The falling out on The View. The very public feud with Donald Trump that began long before it became a political story and escalated far beyond what anyone anticipated. Her mental health, including a documented history of depression, became part of the public record. Her heart attack in 2012 was another chapter in a life that had already accumulated more public chapters than most people go through in a lifetime. And through all of it, the core of who she is remained the same. She says what she thinks, she admits when she is struggling, and she does not perform a version of herself calibrated for approval. That has cost her. It has also earned her genuine, lasting loyalty from people who recognize the real thing when they see it. Which brings us back to Ireland. A year and a half is not a vacation. It is a decision. It is walking away from a specific kind of noise and giving yourself time to figure out which parts of public life you actually want, and on what terms. She was not Rosie O'Donnell, the celebrity on those streets. She was a woman with 2 lines on her face that made her look sad. And in that ordinariness, after decades of relentless spotlight, something settled. She came back to do a one-woman show. 3 weeks in New York, in July and August, on a stage with no ensemble, no character to hide behind, no script written by someone else. Just her stories, and an audience sitting right in front of her. She has hosted the Tonys 3 times. She knows Broadway from every angle. But this is different from hosting. This is her own work, her own material, drawn from a period of her life more private than anything she has shared before. The medication, the weight loss, the child who almost stopped her, the year and a half abroad. If even a fraction of that is on stage, audiences will be seeing a version of Rosie O'Donnell more current and more unguarded than anything she has put in front of a crowd before. She described herself at the Tony Awards as thrilled. Not nervous. Not proud. Thrilled. That is the language of someone who genuinely cannot wait for what is coming. She also said something that landed differently than everything else. She talked about honesty as the thing that matters most to her right now. About how people are dishonest with the public constantly, and how deeply that bothers her. Everything she is doing, the essay, the interview, the show, is a deliberate counterweight to that. She is going to tell the truth. She is going to do it on stage, in person, with an audience watching. That is a very specific kind of courage. And it tends to produce the best work. So after a year and a half of going quiet, after everything she has survived, after a body that changed and a face that needed adjusting and a child who pushed back and a show she is bringing back to New York, the real question is this: what has Rosie O'Donnell been holding on to all this time that she is finally ready to say out loud?